Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have a super amazing guest for you guys today. I am very excited for this episode. We have Dr. Dana Liz. She holds her RD, a PhD, and she's also a graduate of the International Olympic Committee, where she received her diploma in sports nutrition. And she's worked with world-class athletes, Olympic and professional sports teams, including our good old Bay Area Golden State Warriors, as well as some professional athletes in cycling, snowboarding, swim, and soccer. And her doctoral research focused on the effects of gelatin and vitamin C, as well as epicatechin-rich cocoa supplementation on collagen synthesis, which is a very hot topic right now, and performance. And that's definitely what we're going to dive into with her today. So thank you so much, Dana, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on today. It's always fun to find new nutrition podcast shows that are also very kind of evidence-based and not way out in wacko land.
Yes. We love having our professional researchers on here to break the truth and give us the real deal information of what's being disclosed. But before we learn too much about you, Dana, we're going to dive right into your 2 truths and a lie. So what do you got lined up for us?
All right, here are my 3.
Okay.
1, I have personally rebuilt a 1975 Volkswagen Type 2 bus.
Ooh.
Second one, my first career trajectory was to become a rock/mountain guide. And
Okay.
3, I have skied in the Himalayas.
Oh, okay.
I'll leave that with you to ruminate on.
Okay. So Nia and I, what we do is we guess which one is the lie, but don't tell us the answer. And Nia and I we have to get a building tally here eventually, but I'm going to say you maybe did not ski in the Himalayas. I don't know. It sounds far away.
Just
so I'm going to go with that one.
Face.
Yeah. Don't tell me the answer. I'm not sure if Nia's connection is good enough. Can you hear us, Nia? Or do you want to chime in on your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I might go for the first one and say maybe you built a different vehicle or something along those lines, but either way, all 3 are super impressive. So
yeah, that is, I know. If you rebuilt a bus, I want you to email me pictures after this podcast.
We will see at the end of the show.
Yes, exactly. So Dana, break it down for us. How did you get involved in this field?
Yeah, I mean, some of it kind of happened organically. I was working as a registered dietitian in Canada, and was lucky enough right after internship to land a full-time job in elite sport.
Awesome.
And
wow.
was quickly working with Olympic swimmers, snowboarders, provincial level. So provincial is the same as like state level, gymnastics, and huge learning curve. Not as many jobs in performance or in sport nutrition. And when you're kind of working at that level with elite athletes, you quickly realize that your scope of practice is limited, and that in order to really have an impact on performance, you're looking to help athletes reach their full potential, but also enough of that potential that you're making the difference between a few watts or tenths of a millisecond. Right. Which is the difference between winning and losing, an Olympic gold medal. So in order to do that from a nutrition perspective, you really do need to expand your training. And I really needed to find a way to get a much more expansive physiology training and education, and also research. Because when you're working in, interdisciplinary or sports medicine teams, whatever the term is that you use, you're working with some great minds, and you need to be able to think, sort of be a critical thinker, understand, what research is happening where, and how some of this, innovative thought processes and innovative research can, underpin the whole sort of performance support system for an athlete. And so you can really think strategically and think out of the box, and then be able to, measure if your strategies are working. So you really need to have that research experience as well. So I ended up finding my way to a PhD, and I never thought, I was not really an academic at all. And ended up finding my way to a PhD. And the PhD also just sort of happened a little bit organically, where I was, at American College of Sports Medicine annual conference, which if anyone's not aware of that conference, it's a fantastic, sports science, sports medicine conference. and just talking to a colleague of mine, Trent Stellingworth, he's a, good friend, colleague. And we just started chatting about, what our athletes were doing leading up to London 2012. And there was a huge influx of athletes jumping on the gluten-free diet bandwagon. And from a practitioner perspective, we didn't really know, is there something going on with athletes guts, perhaps, that, may make them more susceptible to gluten. And maybe athletes are doing something that we don't necessarily have the research yet, but there could be, a physiological rationale. And I do believe a lot of the best research questions come from the field, from what athletes are already doing, or insight from athletes or practitioners. And that's sort of the, field to lab piece, and then into the lab back to the field. And I really love that sort of flow of information and way of working. So with that gluten question that we had at a bar in, I can't remember where, that kind of, started off a whole PhD journey into gluten-free diets in athletes, low FODMAP diets, and it kind of went from there.
Yeah. Amazing. That is a very interesting topic. Do you recall what kind of year that was when that became?
Yeah, we're leading into London 2012 Olympic Games.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was working with the Canadian national swim team, the Vancouver training group, quite extensively at that time period. And we had a bunch of, swimmers kind of all of a sudden starting a gluten-free diet, a few months out from the Olympics. And we just didn't really have any research to,
right.
So other than a clinical condition requiring the avoidance of gluten. We didn't really have anything more than that to advise on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just say too, for our listeners, we will link these papers in the show notes too, because I think, Dana, you have a great website, which we'll link, that has the, I think, the abstracts available as well. So we'll link all that stuff in the show notes for the listeners as we kind of go over all these different areas of her research. So you did some gluten-free FODMAP research, and then you kind of changed directions at some point, or shifted.
I think sometimes when you're a practitioner and a researcher, you're sort of wear two hats. Sometimes you end up jumping around a bit. You don't always have this one sort of area you focus on for your whole life. And with the collagen research, again, that kind of just happened a bit organically. My husband took a job at University of California, Davis. Nice. And just through sort of the sports science network, I knew Dr. Keith Baar, who has a molecular physiology lab, and he's done a lot of collagen work in engineered ligaments and rodents. And so he got a fantastic funding opportunity to support a postdoc. And I went into his office and he offered me this postdoc. And if you know Keith Baar's work, you don't say no to that. You don't turn that down. You don't even really think about it. So I took that, and that led to about four years of research looking at the effects of collagen. We looked at epicatechin-rich cocoa. We also did some work in MSM, methyl sulfonylmethane, looking at different measures and different sort of study designs around collagen synthesis, connective tissue health or connective tissue performance. And that was a 4-year journey, and it just I guess kind of got truncated with COVID, like a lot of research, because we couldn't run research. Right. But that was also a great opportunity to go in another direction.
Amazing. So I definitely want to dive into the collagen topic with you. Obviously, it's I feel like you see it in everything these days. Bars, I've seen collagen chips. I mean, you name it. And kind of before we dive into that kind of rabbit hole, could you give us kind of a breakdown on maybe what's the difference between collagen and gelatin?
Yep. And I would agree with you that there's collagen in everything. Collagen popcorn. Like, I don't want collagen. I just want some butter and salt. Right. But it's definitely, and it's interesting sort of seeing that. I've been working in industry quite a bit in the last 2 years, and sort of gaining that insight and perspective too, of like product design and just, what grabs consumers. And it's fascinating insight for sure. Yeah. But back to the question. So what's the difference between, collagen and gelatin? So both are proteins that are composed of amino acids, are both extracted from, skin, bones of of animals. So you'll have bovine, porcine, and marine.
Mhm.
And so once this is extracted, it's then processed. So you have these, collagen tissue. And with the gelatin, it's sort of the first process. So using a heat treatment, that is where you get a collagen product from. So the heat treatment will break up these collagen peptides into smaller peptides. And then another step, which are, various hydrolyzation methods, will then break the gelatin into smaller dipeptides and single amino acids.
Okay.
So with, collagen, Jello, for example, it forms that gel. So it's used a lot in, various baking and food products. And those properties, the properties of forming that gelling agent are ideal in some foods. But I don't particularly love gelatin in my coffee.
Right.
But collagen will mix in, and anyone who's listening and uses collagen, you'll know it, it mixes in. It doesn't really have a taste. It dissolves, fairly easily.
And so why would one want to potentially, well, I guess we could look at it from the research perspective. Why would we want to research collagen and look at that in an athlete world?
Yeah. So when you look at, tissue synthesis in a human, in an athlete, tissue synthesis, turnover, those are, one of the main things we're looking to stimulate for adaptations. So with an athlete, rate of force development, so how much force you can generate and how fast that force is generated, is a really important indicator of athletic performance in a lot of different sports. Everything from like the sprint at the end of a cycling race to a hammer throw, rate of force development plays a huge role in performance. And, when you measure, when you have, really sort of stiff tissues, stiff tendons and ligaments that can generate more force faster, then you're gonna have a better performance, or a better performance parameter, or improved performance parameter. And I sometimes think about it like a hair elastic. So when you have those nice new fresh hair elastics, they're all springy, your hair stays in a ponytail. But then after a couple of days of using it, they start to stretch out and they're not as springy. They don't hold your hair as well. They start sliding down.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of think about it, having, a really stiff tendon or ligament that can generate force really well, or a ligament that has more laxity, and it takes a little bit more to generate force and just can't generate as much force as fast. So I mean, there's obviously, if you have a super stiff tendon or ligament, there's also an injury risk piece. So and I won't get into it too much, but there are sort of tipping points of when you want to make sure that your tendon and ligament isn't so stiff and strong that it's kind of, it has a risk of causing injury. So I wouldn't say that's a huge risk with like supplementing collagen. It's not going to cause that to happen. But there are, individual athlete physiologies that we want to be aware of. If there's, a recurrent injury, what is the actual reason for that specific injury? But we look at muscle protein synthesis, and we understand that very well now. We know that leucine stimulates mTOR pathway, but the amino acids that are more predominant in connective tissue, so that's everything from bone to the extracellular matrix of the muscle to tendons and ligaments, are a lot higher in other amino acids. So we know that, as I mentioned, leucine stimulates the mTOR pathway, but glycine is the most important amino acid in connective tissue. So if you look at a peptide sequence in a collagen fiber or collagen-based tissue, every third amino acid is glycine.
Oh, wow.
So glycine is actually quite low in, like not super low, that there's none of it, but it's much higher. It's the most occurring amino acid in a collagen extract supplement or collagen or gelatin, whereas it's a lot lower in like a whey protein or if you're eating like the muscle of an animal.
Interesting.
So yeah, I guess theoretically we think if we can feed those building blocks at an appropriate time when an athlete's doing exercise or a training program to stimulate connective tissue adaptations,
Mhm.
then it makes sense to have those building blocks available. You wouldn't build a fence and have your wood way over there. You would want to have
Right.
wood beside you to build that fence. So that's sort of the theory behind supplementing with collagen for athletes.
Awesome. That is an excellent breakdown. I think I also get the question, or I've seen maybe in some reading of some literature too, you mentioned obviously the rate of force production, which is obviously very important when it comes to performance. What about with regards to someone does maybe get an injury and they are out and they're trying to recover? Is there a place for collagen supplementation post?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that is I think a place where I'm a little more open to more blanket recommending collagen in a way. I still am definitely very much on the fence if collagen is something we should recommend to all athletes. I still think it's a case by case or a team by team. And there's a whole bunch of factors that, I think about whether or not I recommend collagen. But in an injury, in a soft tissue or a bone injury, to me, it makes sense to have those building blocks. When your body is looking to have those building blocks to resynthesize tissue, for me, in my opinion, it makes sense to have those amino acids available.
Yeah. Wow. It makes me think of a client experience in question when you talk about different groups or even maybe teams or things like that, where supplementation might be successful or suggested. I had a client, he was in a bike crash, but it also kind of makes me think of maybe other situations, because we talk about like tendon strength. If there's a situation where there's an injury and the tendon is so strong that the tendon doesn't give, but it rips the bone. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is that a place where like the tendon's already so strong? Like, do we need collagen supplementation to help with that injury recovery, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to, you're not going to make something worse. You're not going to all of a sudden create a really stiff tissue just because you're feeding amino acids. A lot of times, the most important, I think where sort of injuries happen in the scenario you're explaining sometimes is that myotendinous junction. So there, in that fiber, there is the fiber changes throughout. So it's more stiff and dense in the middle. And then when you go towards the end of that fiber, where it is essentially attaching to the muscle, there's sort of this like finger locking. When you look at it like an MRI, it looks like the kind of little fingers interlocking, where the tissue is a lot more supple and not pliable. I'm missing the word that I need, but the tissue characteristics they transition so that you don't have that sharp change in functionality.
Okay.
So I think when we first started looking at collagen and looking at how we would use it in athletes and what it does to what it can do to tissue that we're stimulating, collagen's not going to do anything magical. It's not going to all of a sudden make your tissue more stiff and dense. It's just a building block. It's it's the way an athlete moves. It's the type of training they're doing. It's imbalances or recurrent injuries that are what's causing an injury. It's not going to be magic amino acids causing super stiff tissue. So I think we focused on that for a little bit, and we were like, oh, how do we know if we're making something worse? And I think I think from a practitioner perspective and working through a lot of different cases, the effect of feeding amino acids and causing tissue to be too stiff is not something that I'm particularly concerned about.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. And it kind of also makes me think the comparison of muscle in the sense of we're talking about supplementing with leucine-rich protein sources. If you're not also stimulating that muscle via forms of contraction, there's likely not going to be much muscle growth. Maybe you're building there. Is it a similar idea with tendons in the sense of like we can bring in these glycine dominant protein sources, but do we need to then stress that tendon tissue to get it to grow or repair?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I think it's definitely case by case and what sort of recovery you're looking for. So when you're doing more explosive movements, you're going to be stimulating your body to you're going to be stimulating sort of more collagen synthesis or turnover. So like plyometric workouts, for example, you're going to stimulate your body to, generate more force and hopefully stimulate turnover and synthesis. And in when you're looking through, I guess, more of a rehab or a prevention type training system, you'll see trainers and coaches doing more of an isometric hold. So you're basically, you're holding for 30 seconds, let's say, in a wall squat. And what you're doing is you're breaking cross links, but then you're also getting telling your body to essentially make more cross links in that sort of lengthened position. So I would say, depending on the athlete, the type of sport, that specific athlete's movements, you'll do both. But they'll each have a rationale and a time point when it fits in best with a periodized training plan. Keith Baar published a really good stress relaxation study. So it was in an NBA athlete, and it was a patellar tendinopathy case. And he outlined the type of training that was recommended. So length of the isometric holds, how long, the gelatin or collagen supplementation, and outlined that whole sort of process. So I would definitely, if anyone's interested in really learning, the nuances of different training stimulus to hopefully, stimulate different types of adaptations, that would be an excellent paper, and I'm happy to send it. So you can watch it.
Definitely.
Yeah. And, but with that one study too, it was, they showed an MRI image of the patellar tendinopathy, and, pre-treatment, you could see that sort of white part very clearly on the MRI. And by the end of the treatment, that the white part that shows the injury was gone on the MRI. Wow. So pretty successful study. And I think, it's always a reference point for me. I am not an expert in different training modalities for, tendons and ligaments. I just know, the fundamental pieces. But yeah, definitely. If you wanted to get more into that too, bringing Keith on would be probably your best person.
Yeah, definitely. And we will, we'll get that article and we will link that in the show notes too for the listeners, because that's a great one. So you also mentioned with your research, you looked at epicatechin-rich cocoa supplementation. I have not, to be honest, read any research in this area. So this is all news to me. What was your thought process there? Was it that the epicatechin-rich cocoa could help with collagen supplementation? Kind of give me some background on that area.
Yeah, that area, I still have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So there are a couple studies looking at collagen, and these are not real live people studies. These are in a lab, in a dish. So I think you always have to be very careful when you're trying to translate and scale up. And that was, something that I really enjoyed doing, was seeing if these studies that worked in a dish or in engineered ligaments or, or a rodent, if scaling that up to a human, if it has the same effect, and also if we're able to measure it. Yeah. So there were a couple studies looking at dental pulp collagen synthesis and looking at upregulation of some enzymes that are upregulated when certain collagens increase synthesis. So looking at that sort of stepwise pathway of theoretically, if certain signaling pathways are upregulated, then we would assume that the collagen synthesis would then be upregulated. So the dental pulp studies are sort of one piece. Keith's lab, they scaled that up a little bit and ran a rodent study. So gave rodents different doses of epicatechins and then measured ERK1 and 2, I believe. And they were measuring increases in phosphorylation or changes in phosphorylation as a measure of collagen synthesis. And they did find increased upregulation that was dose respondent. So that we then took that study and jumped with that sort of dose response piece, jumped essentially right into a human study. And I think it was still a big jump, but I mean, epicatechins are healthier, epicatechen rich cocoa is healthy for a variety of reasons. So it's good for you for a lot of reasons. So in terms of making that jump, definitely a huge jump. So we did give subjects epicatechen rich cocoa, so measure the epicatechins, so it's non-alkalized, and that's something I think is important to know, just for listeners or any nutritionists that are recommending cocoa. We always say, hey, dark cocoa is good for you, and you should have dark chocolate. And it's also important to flip over the label and check if the cocoa is alkalized or non-alkalized. So darker chocolate tends to be non-alkalized. Or bitter chocolate tends to be non-alkalized. The alkalization process kind of takes away that bitterness, but it also reduces the epicatechen content significantly.
Interesting.
So I believe in Europe, it is required to indicate if the cocoa used in a chocolate bar or candy or something is treated or not. But it's called Dutched.
Interesting.
Or alkalized. So you'll see Dutched or non-alkalized, alkalized. And the US, I don't know if it's required or not. And that's just something I should know, but I don't. Yeah. I'm Canadian. So it's an important piece to look at. So anyway, we measured the epicatechins and found around 4 milligrams per gram. So 4 milligrams of epicatechen per gram of cocoa.
Okay.
And we fed subjects a dose response. So we had different doses, and it was crossover, blinded design. So subjects, would take one dose for 5 days, and they also had a periodized training plan. One dose for 5 days. And we also would essentially even out the cocoa powder amount with that alkalized cocoa that didn't have any epicatechins left in it. So the dose was the same. And then it was a crossover study. So each subject, had each dose of cocoa, and then also did the prescribed training. And we measured collagen synthesis using, and it's technically an indirect marker, P1NP, and terminal 1 peptide.
Okay.
And so when you make collagen in your body, you through the processing, basically the C and N terminus are chopped off. So when you're like learning about nutrition and sort of organic chemistry, you'll see C and N terminus in peptides. And so those are chopped off. So the more collagen you make, the more of those chopped off ends will be floating around in the blood. And that's what we measure.
Oh, interesting.
So we measured post, 4 hours post, and 24 hours post with through the crossover design, and measured P1NP levels. And from that study, and I think it was a small study, and I think I take it for what it is. We did find an increase with the 1 milligram per kilogram. We did see an increase in P1NP levels. See that the one gram per kilogram body weight of epicatechen rich cocoa was enough to significantly increase P1NP levels, about 15%.
Okay.
Slide. But again, when you look at the individual responses, there's variability. Some subjects seem to respond really well. Some subjects didn't change at all. So I think there's a lot of variability, like with any human body. So I think with that study, if I was to run it again, I would run a much bigger sample size. We did do sample size calculation, and it was powered enough, but just with all of the noise and variables with that type of study, I think running that again with a much larger sample size, and possibly measuring some other some maybe bone markers, because P1NP is measuring basically bone collagen turnover or synthesis. So I might also do some sort of bone turnover markers as well. So we actually haven't even published that study. It was something we worked on, but then, kind of wanted to run it with a bigger sample size. I think a lot of the data in that area still is kind of with more in vitro work. So yeah, something to think about. It's not something, it's not, yeah, I think 1 milligram per kilogram we found was, lowest effective dose. But I won't prescribe that to add. I might say, hey, add this in, but I wouldn't be very aggressive about prescribing it. I think it's, as I mentioned, offers other benefits. So if we're just trying to do everything possible to, help an athlete through recovery as fast as possible, yeah, I'll probably throw it in.
And you would throw that in a, like, just a non-alkalized, like cocoa, like could it be hot chocolate, or is this a chocolate bar? Or
I would heat does affect epicatechin, so I usually just put it in a smoothie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And if you've ever I mean, you can do it's if as long as it's not super boiling and sitting there for a while, it's fine. But cocoa powder, if you've ever had a lot of it, I personally get nauseous. I remember the first time I was sort of running myself through the study, and I was like, "Oh my God, I cannot make do this." It's like, it's like a good chunk. If you're going 1 gram per kilogram, you're looking at like 75 grams of cocoa powder. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So that I was also just worried about, is there any risk with taking this much cocoa powder? And yeah, the subjects, I only had one subject who had to drop out because he vomited from that much cocoa powder.
Oh, no.
So yeah, when you're working with smaller athletes, then the risk is high. But yeah, some things to be aware of. So usually when I'm recommending it, I kind of go on the more reserve side, and we'll just get an athlete to toss maybe a tablespoon or two in a smoothie and take it for what it is.
Yeah. And how does something like non-alkalized cocoa powder compare to like the kind of like chopped up cacao nibs that you can get?
Yeah, I'd have to look up the epicatechin content. So with different cocos or cacao nibs, the sort of processing and where the cocoa is actually harvested from, all of that changes the actual epicatechin content.
Gotcha.
And it could be significant, it could be negligible. But yeah, I think the cacao nibs are fine as well. Yeah.
Okay.
If there's something that somebody likes or can put in bars and stuff. I just think it's probably easier to get a higher dose if that's needed in a powder.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm sure a lot of people are happy to hear that, to get some dark chocolate, non-alkalized cocoa powder in their smoothies. I'm sure people are very happy to hear that. So you mentioned the Keith Baar study and that kind of protocol. And it makes me think too, I definitely have seen some research that looked at maybe timing of collagen supplementation in relation to training. Can you dive into that, and like what are your thoughts on that? Is there an optimal time for consumption, and then maybe what is a optimal dose if consumed any time of day?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely lots of different protocols out, and I think that what we think is the best strategy lately has actually changed a little bit. So the initial sort of athlete study was done with gelatin, and that was a collaboration between the Baar Lab and then a nutrition dietitian in Australia, Greg Shaw. And he's been around for a while. He's a researcher / practitioner, works in Aussie rules football. I think it's AFL quite a bit. So had the practical sort of insight into that study design. And what they did in that design, it was a dose response study they did 0, 5, and I believe 15 grams of gelatin. It was 10 or 15. And they fed the supplement 3 times a day. And then they also jump roped about an hour after taking the supplement. So the reason for the hour after is that the amino acids are highest in terms of circulating in the blood. So they're, through the stomach, circulating in the blood, and at that level. So it kind of makes sense again to have that, your wood or your building blocks available when you're needing to build, or when you're stimulating that pathway. So that was the rationale there. They did find, in that study, again, a significant improvement in in collagen synthesis with the
Mhm.
gelatin supplementation in a dose response manner.
Hmm.
And then that with that sort of system of feeding the supplement and jumping and stimulating, so the jump rope done throughout the day, collagen synthesis or P1NP levels remained elevated, I believe, for about 72 hours. I think they did. Yeah.
Wow.
So they did remain elevated. Now, I think it's also important when you're looking at any research to make sure, when you have those, pull apart the individual research. So when you look at the individual responses, still variability.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important, when we do any analysis, we do the analysis in various ways, like to look at, delta change, look at individual responses, look at time points. And I think it's important when you're looking at research, just because you see a significant increase, really try to dig into the data, into the individual responses as well. I think, with over 3,000 sport nutrition publications a year now, compared to 10 years ago, it was like 300. I'd say that more papers are getting through the peer review process that shouldn't.
Yeah.
So I think just as a practitioner, just being aware of some of those nuances. But so with that study, the dose of 10 grams was recommended as sort of the lowest effective dose. So we took that information and then basically scaled that up to a collagen study with various arms. So we wanted to look at, is there different digestion and absorption of collagen versus gelatin, because it is smaller. So I'm trying to get the sun out of my face here, because it is, the peptides are much smaller in the collagen, could be, absorbed and digested easier. And so we ran a gelatin versus collagen, so gelatin versus collagen versus a gummy. So we ran that study. We did find a similar increase in P1NP levels, about a 10% increase from baseline with the supplementation, the jump rope protocol. With the gummy, we actually saw no increase in P1NP levels. And
Interesting.
That was probably because, as sometimes you learn the hard way, and sometimes my husband says my middle name is Dana, learn the hard way, least. We killed the vitamin. I killed the vitamin C. So it was too hot when we were adding it to our gelatin mix. And so when athletes came and fasted for this study, they wouldn't have had any circulating vitamin C levels. And we know that vitamin C is an important precursor for collagen synthesis, for as a cofactor into lysyl oxidase, which is one of the key steps. So mess that one up. But we did find that gelatin and collagen similarly increased P1NP levels. And the amino acids as well were similar, the circulating amino acids. But there are a couple other studies that have shown higher glycine levels with the collagen compared to a gelatin. So there's 2 studies showing that that's not the case. So when I look at, okay, what are we really going to do in practice? I'm not going to use gelatin unless you want to eat a tray of Jell-O. So I don't worry too much about like what's better, what's better absorbed. Collagen is just readily available, and if you decide that you want to use it, mixes easily, etc.
Yeah. So with that, was that both 10-gram doses when you compared the gelatin versus the collagen? Okay.
So we found, and I think I'm with the initial study, it might have been 15 for some reason. It's a seminal study, and I'm blanking out on the actual numbers. We've done a lot of dose response studies. So we scaled that up. We did a dose response again with the collagen, and we went all the way up to 30 grams.
Oh, wow.
So within that study, and I won't bore everyone with all the little details, but it was, double blind crossover. So subjects went through every dose, the washout period, et cetera. And we found that 20 grams of collagen seemed to be the lowest effective dose.
Okay.
But it's still, I don't walk around saying, yeah, we found this and you have to take 20 grams of collagen. I still, there's still variability. And there's also some recent research coming out of Luc van Loon's lab in the Netherlands, measuring, similar study design, measuring collagen in the extracellular matrix of the muscle. And in some of his work, and it hasn't been published yet, there was just a couple abstracts that were at a conference, and they didn't really see much change with the supplementation. So, we have a lot of questions around, well, our athletes, have they They maybe eat so much protein that the extra collagen doesn't do anything over the normal high protein intake, or that athletes, already have sort of stimulated those pathways as much as they possibly can. So we don't see as much of a change from baseline. So there's still a lot of questions around the effectiveness of a collagen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we ran the crossover different doses, and we did the same thing with the vitamin C as well, to see if the vitamin C level or the vitamin C dose mattered. As long as there's some vitamin C, it's fine. We didn't find any sort of dose response effect.
Yeah. Okay. So that leads me into some of our questions that our listeners submitted. So I definitely want to get your feedback on that. So you mentioned vitamin C being obviously a critical component to helping with that absorption and kind of aiding in that tendon reparation process with the collagen. So the heating of vitamin C can be detrimental. What are your thoughts on, or I guess maybe I should start with like, what should people look for? So he said kind of like 15, 20 gram dose is what seems to be effective. Is there a certain form I've seen on some labels that'll say like tendon type 1, tendon type or collagen type 1, like what's like, do we need to look for a certain type of collagen?
Yeah,
or...
it gets confusing, and there's 6 different names on a package for essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
Hydrolyzed collagen, collagen peptides, hydrolyzed collagen peptides, hydrolyzed gelatin peptides. So there's a lot of names for the same thing. So far, there's not really any research that I've come across that has shown that a type 2 collagen or a type 3 collagen is best for tendons, or certain types of collagens are best for skin. And I wish it worked well.
Yeah.
So I would say I wouldn't worry too much about the type of collagen that is in the product. If you are going to use collagen supplements, then I would probably just go for like a collagen peptide or hydrolyzed collagen. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the different Roman numerals. Not yet, and that may change. That's what's fun about this area.
Right.
But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the Roman numerals yet.
Forever learning. So common area I hear my clients use collagen, and kind of this probably came from that initial study that you mentioned with the jump roping where they consumed it 60 minutes prior. Many of our athletes train early in the morning. So then trying to follow that protocol, they want to take their collagen before they get out for that morning training session. That's also when they tend to have their coffee. So is there any issue with combining collagen, either mixing it in their coffee or sipping it side by side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I remember coming across a study. It was a lab study. So I'm not a lab, that doesn't make sense, but in vitro study. And it showed that collagen synthesis was basically reduced with caffeine. And, a lot of times we're like, hey, we're getting ready for our workout. We're going to give collagen and caffeine and you're going to get good to go. When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we've been doing it all wrong. I'm like ruining things. And so I did talk to Keith and one of his amazing PhD students. I was like, can you guys run anything? Like, can we I want to find this out. I can't live without knowing this. So I won't give away their work because they ran some excellent studies on engineered ligaments. But they did not find, there was one interesting finding, but overall, no difference in collagen synthesis and the properties of the engineered ligament collagen. So they'll look at some of the expression of different enzymes, and then also look at the properties of the engineered ligament. And if you look up online, like what those look like, they're just little like white pieces, little anchors, and then they stress them and exercise them and stuff. So yeah, they didn't find anything. I was very relieved when they sent me some of that data. So I'm sure they will have that published eventually. But so far, you can still have your coffee and your collagen. Yes. Should be fine.
This is why I'm so happy we have you on, because I believe I read that same study because I had I think I got like a newsletter email from a supplement company
It was
that
from Momentous.
yes.
I know. I saw that too. I was like, oh.
Yes. And they sent that out and they're like, don't combine caffeine with collagen. Like it's no go. And I'm like, oh no. Like,
Oh, no,
yeah.
I've been recommending that to like lots
Yeah.
of people.
Right. And then I was reading the study as well. And I started asking all these questions. Like, I'm like, okay, so this is a piece of tendon in a petri dish and the caffeine's not going through the digestive system. So that's obviously different.
Yeah.
But then if I did my math right, I believe the caffeine content they were saturating the tissue with was like an insanely high dose of caffeine compared to what a normal human would consume. So I was like, I don't think this is applicable to real people to start making this change yet. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so I think that's really good to hear you say that.
Yeah, excellent. I'm so glad you dug into that.
Yeah.
And I was surprised when they sent that out. And I was like, oh, you're missing.
Yeah. Jumping the gun,
I
think.
A lot to say based on that one study.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad you broke that down and sort of dug into it. And I think that, that's a perfect example of really taking findings from, a dish where, you have super concentrated amounts of whatever you're using. And then assuming that these same effects are going to happen in the human body and vice versa. Sometimes you have, superhuman doses in a dish. And when you scale that up, and there are factors that are general guidelines for scaling doses up from in vitro, cell cultures to a human. But, that's something that I think is really important to consider when you're looking at, some of the preliminary studies in any area. We also will, the same lab, so Keith's lab, they looked at iron as well. Because iron and copper are cofactors for collagen synthesis, and they didn't find significant changes with collagen synthesis with a low iron state. But again, that was like kind of off the side of your desk to check out this study. So when I look, if I look at an athlete and I look at what changes in iron levels do, how they affect different systems, energy availability, iron levels, I think, those still do play a role in just, tissue health synthesis. So I think it is important just to, when you're looking at the whole athlete, just all some of those micronutrients, et cetera, are also important to consider.
Yeah, definitely. So people can consume their collagen with their caffeine. You mentioned the heat component. So should they be sipping cold brew coffee? Is it okay if it's warm coffee or not boil it or?
Well, the first thing is they should be drinking good coffee and not brown water that comes dripping into a pot. Right. It should be espresso or something decent, Americano. So no bad coffee is the first rule. But in terms of putting collagen into coffee, it's fine. The amino acids they're already broken down into peptide single amino acids. They're not going to, that amount of heat, they're really actually quite resistant to that amount of heat. So you're fine.
And if there's already a combined, because I've seen now with that vitamin C research, some collagen supplements, including a vitamin C component, are we hesitant that the heat of the coffee might damage any of that, or what's the temperature?
That's a great question. I think for the time, like the vitamin C, if you had the vitamin C ingesting, like I don't know if you put vitamin C directly in your coffee because the flavor you can't really get rid of, but let's say you took it on the side, have your, collagen, mix it in some water or something, and then you have your coffee, you're sipping back and forth. And the heat is not enough to really damage the vitamin C at all. You really need a hot temperature and you need it to sit there for a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That's good to know. And then let's see, we had, of course, all related to collagen. So then the other question, it's kind of a bit of different questions regarding like what kind of things can they mix with their collagen. So we covered coffee. We had another client ask, what about mixing it with collagen with something like psyllium husk powder, a fiber, like really rich fiber sources? Is there potential to inhibit?
Like
if there's not research out there or we don't know, please feel free to.
I would kind of just look at, what do we know about what, like a psyllium husk or some of those, prebiotic fibers, how do they act in the gut? What do they do?
Mhm.
I wouldn't really worry too much about like these well-absorbed amino acids being significantly, their absorption being significantly affected or impacted with other foods, or, a psyllium husk or any other sort of, nutritional compound that we know may impact the absorption rate. I think if anything, it'd be so minute that it doesn't really matter. I think the bigger question is, the timing, the dose, and if even it makes a difference in collagen synthesis. I think those bigger pictures, I think sometimes we get so caught up in these little questions that, the effect on absorption is so minor that it probably, it doesn't matter even if the absorption is decreased or slowed a little bit. I still think it's really, really negligible. Yeah. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay. So primary things are making sure it includes a vitamin C source to help with absorption, and then making sure we're not overheating that or like cooking it as a gelatin or something.
Yeah.
Like, or gummy.
If you're eating breakfast that has, some fruit and vegetable in it, I don't really think you need to supplement with vitamins. You just need a little bit circulating. Yeah. But if you're, working out in a fasted state, then I would make sure that you have some form of vitamin C that you're taking in.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, that I think ties up our questions from the audience. We are going to be doing a part 2 with Dana. So you guys who are listening can jump to our part 2. We're going to be diving into her research on FODMAP research and the gluten-free diet in athletes and on GI health. And so skip to that part. If not, we'll give you a tie up here shortly with Dana, and we're going to just cruise right into that one.